Okay, folks, welcome back to Battle for Azeroth. Wanted to do a state of for Shadow. Was going to do this before Battle for Azeroth came out, and playing a lot in Legion, and then playing as I leveled, it really hasn't changed much, so I feel like I can sufficiently give my thoughts. It's probably the most fun to play of the three specs, I would say. I think that's mainly why I wanted to do this. So if we look at the spellbook, we didn't lose anything. Shadow's the only spec that kept its artifact ability in the form of a talent. We'll get to that. Otherwise, we didn't lose anything, and I don't think we gained anything. We got Power Word Fortitude back, which works just like it did before. So I forget to use it half the time, but thankfully there's usually another priest in the group. So, and I think I think the spell magic may be new. I'm not sure. Didn't really play. It's one of those details I didn't really play priest a lot to know. Seems like this is new. But other than that, that's it. Fairly simple. Probably the simplest of the three specs. So a lot of people play Shadow, so that's not a big surprise. I think they tend to try to keep it a little simpler. So if we look at the talents, these are probably, of all the classes I've seen, all the different specs, and I've seen easily most of them at this point. This probably has, Shadow probably has the talents that are the easiest to choose from, I think. And I will, hopefully in explaining why, you will understand why I say that. So I took Shadowy Insights. And this is one of the things I wanted to highlight about this, is it Shadow Word Pain periodic damage has a chance to reset the remaining cooldown on Mind Blast and cause your next Mind Blast to be instant cast. This can proc back to back, and Mind Blast does 4,000 damage. And I'm at max level. I'm under geared. I'm very poorly geared at this point. I just reached 120. So that's not, with where we are, that's not too bad, actually. And it generates 12 insanity. So the talents work together really well. And you will see, hopefully you will see that as we go through here, and kind of see what I've done. Fortress of the Mind, Mind Flay, and Mind Blast deal 10% more damage and generate 20% more insanity. So insanity was the big change, in case you didn't know, in Legion. Shadow Priest got insanity, Druids got Maelstrom, in their, you kind of see what they were doing in their attempt to flush out the fantasy experience of playing a class. So I don't use mine snare, because I already have one channeled ability, and if you played Warlock when they had Drain Soul and Life, Drain Soul and Drain Life, I think. Yeah, I think it's Drain Life. It's very hard to kind of balance two Drain abilities, and Mind Flay does much better. So why would you? And this is for purposes of discussion, I think it's fair to say that Shadow Priest is somewhat of a trying to think of the right word, somewhat of a pseudo warlock for purposes of discussion. You put your dots out there, you get your abilities on cooldown, and then you use your channeled ability. It's very similar to me. As somebody that plays priest and warlock almost exclusively in PvP, they're very similar. They have their respective differences, of course, but they are very similar. So, yeah, I really don't have any trouble with Insanity, and you will see why as we move down the talents here. So this really doesn't do anything for me. And then Shadow Word Void. I did look at this. Generates 15 Insanity. Mind Blast generates 12, so you're getting 2 more. And it does have 2 charges. It does a little more damage, yes. A few hundred more damage. I think I tried this at one time. You really only use Mind Blast to generate Insanity, basically. I find myself, at least in PvP, spamming Vampiric Touch and then putting my shield on and then using Mind Flay. So it's a bit weird to have one ability that has a cast time, because everything else with PvP talents and regular talents, everything else becomes instant cast at some point. So it's kind of the odd man out is Mind Blast. So that's the only thing. I prefer to have the proc. It procs Shadowy Insight, procs often, and as I said, it can proc back to back. So Shadow Word Void might be good in maybe in raiding or another instance, another situation. Just for PvP's sake, I just wasn't. I just wasn't something I thought was very good. So Shadowy Insights is definitely better. I think this is the must-take talent. Whether you just play Shadow kind of casually or you play it as a main spec, I don't see how getting instant cast Mind Blast is a bad thing. There's a downside to that. Body and Soul, same as it's always been. The thing it doesn't do in Shadow is give the same buff to Leap of Faith. It does is as Discipline. It makes Power Word Shield and Leap of Faith give a movement speed increase. So Sin Lane, just a cooldown of Vampiric Embrace by 45 seconds and increases its healing done by 25%. So Vampiric Embrace essentially works like a pseudo disc priest, essentially, is the way I kind of thought of it. For 15 seconds, it allows you to turn your single target. So your Mind Blast, your Mind Flay, and your Void Bolt, if you have the insanity to use it, turns those abilities into heal a nearby ally for 85% of any single target damage. So this is a bit of a weird ability. It always has been. I've tried using it at different times, and they need to change one of two things: either lower the cooldown or increase the duration, because it's a weird 15 seconds for, especially for a spells that have cooldowns. Mind Blast has 7, so right there, you're halfway. That's half the duration. By the time it takes you could spend another 7 seconds. By the time it takes you to get enough insanity to use Void Eruption again, to use Void Bolt. So sometimes it seems like I've gotten it to do a decent amount. I look at the end of the battleground, and I've done a little higher healing than just self-healing, and other times I think, oh, I did so much in that battle. We had a little skirmish, and everybody was in close range, and then I look and it's a lot lower than I expected it to be. So it's a bit of a weird ability. I think if it was something you could keep on cooldown, with it being 2 minutes, I'm hesitant to use it because I don't want to keep it on cooldown when I really need it, and then I don't end up using it, and yeah. I suppose you could take this. I prefer to have the speed boost. It's so ingrained in my mind at this point that Power Word Shield will give a speed boost. I guess just old habits. And you really, depending on your group, you really may not need this. It's such a situational thing. Some groups you'll have healers. Some groups you don't. Some groups you may not need them, depending on how good your DPS is and the classes and the self heals that they have. So, and if worse comes to worse, you do always have Shadow Mend. So if you're trying to keep a Plague Carrier or something alive, you have choices. And you do have Power Word Shield, which can also be used on an ally. So, Mania, increase your movement speed up to 35% based on your current insanity. Yeah, I pretty well keep Void Eruption on cooldown, so I think that's probably the easiest way to explain it. Your insanity's constantly shifting. And Void Eruption requires less than, I only need 60 insanities, so this just wouldn't end up being that good. At least Body and Soul, comparatively, you're always going to get the effect. Misery, this is much like Shadowy Insight. This is kind of a core, I think, to playing Shadow. Vampiric Touch also applies Shadow Word Pain to the target. You may have noticed I don't have Shadow Word Pain on the command bar. So you're using one spell to put 2 dots out. Shadow Word Pain does initial shadow damage and then a larger amount over 16 seconds. Generates 4 insanity. Vampiric Touch does a large amount of shadow damage over 21 seconds and heals you for 50% of the damage dealt. If Vampiric Touch is dispelled, anyone who's ever done Battlegrounds will probably know this all too well. If Vampiric Touch is dispelled, the Dispeller flees in horror for 3 seconds. So that is not. I very rarely ever think this, especially about a passive. Misery might be overpowered, and if I remember correctly, it's a pretty standard talent. I mean, we've had it for a while, if I remember correctly. So yeah, like I said, this is starting to kind of make more sense now. So you're getting Shadow Word Pain out right away. Vampiric Touch is my opener, and a lot of times I'll just spam this just to put dots out. You want to use Mind Blast to get it on cooldown, just in case Shadowy Insights procs. And then I'm pretty much just using Power Word Shield and then Mind Flay, which does damage over time, channeled, and slows their movement speed by 50%. So if you use all these, this generates 6. Shadow Word Pain generates 4, so there's 10. There's 24. Then if you use that, that's 36. You only need 60 to get this to work. So you run through everything twice, and Void Eruptions. You have Void Eruption up. So, and I do get this up quite a bit. I feel like I waste it more often than I use it. Twist of Fate, after damaging a target below 35 health, you gain 2% increased damage and healing for 8 seconds. Not bad. I don't like abilities that require, a target to be below a certain amount of health. I just think they're wasted more often than they're used. People, by the time you get someone's health down so low, there's, especially in PvP, there is a urgency to get them the rest of the way down so they don't heal back up. Dark Void, unleash an explosion of dark energy around the target, dealing X amount of shadow damage and applying Shadow Word Pain to all nearby enemies. So basically does the same thing as Misery, it's just built into another spell with a 30-second cooldown. Vampiric Touch doesn't have a cooldown. And with this, I would, to me, looking at it, I would be afraid, are people going to be in range? People are running around a lot. In Battlegrounds. I remember trying to think what it was. There was a Warlock ability that would put, Immolate? I want to say it was Cataclysm, was what the name of the spell was, but I don't know if that's right. It did something very similar, but it was a target on location ability, and it was supposed to put a dot on everybody in range, and it just didn't. It sounded really good, it sounded really cool. It's what everybody was taking in Warlords, and I tried it, I played around with it. Admittedly, I was new to Warlock then, and I just didn't like it. It was on cooldown. If I remember correctly, it had a cooldown, so I was trying to use it at the right time, and as I said, it was a target on location ability, and I don't particularly like target on location abilities, so it left me with some doubt. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about here is, okay, this sounds good. If I use it, though, is it really going to spread Shadow Word Pain? I've got single target abilities that do more damage than that. So I'm basically using it to spread Shadow Word Pain. And I can do the same thing with this every second and a half versus a 30-second cooldown. It's not bad. It might work better as a raid ability when you had tanks that were actually keeping mobs together. That's the thing for PvP is you're always going to want to keep in mind movement. People are going to be running around. So Mind Bomb, by far the default choice here. I've tried taking other things. It just doesn't work. You need Mind Bomb. You need something to keep that one persistent, usually it's a warrior, that one persistent melee off you, or to stun a disorientate all enemies within 8 yards of the target for 5 seconds. Or to stun the healer to kind of run through your rotation, things like that. I've tried Last Word. We do have a spell interrupt. We do a shadow. We don't as a disc, which I find interesting. It just didn't work very well. Psychotic Horror terrifies the target in place, stunning them for 4 seconds. I suppose if you wanted another stun in, this is kind of like, I suppose this would be along the same lines as, what am I thinking of? Chastise that Holy uses. Mind Bomb's just what everybody takes, and for good reason. So I would say, unless you're just really adamant about using counter spell, Mind Bomb, or I guess in the right circumstance, Psychotic Horror would be good. My only complaint with Mind Bomb is the cooldown's a little long. I think 20-25 seconds would probably be good. Not by much, just 20-25 seconds. Vicious Spirits. So this was one I actually kind of played around with. I had originally took Shadow Word Death, which became a talent. I want to say at the beginning of Legion. Yeah, I think so. Used to be baseline, then became a talent. As I remember, if I remember correctly. Target has to be only usable on enemies that have less than 20% health. Does have 2 charges. You can see it's still on my command bar, even though I don't use it anymore. Generates 15 insanity or 30 insanity if the target dies. It's not a bad ability. Problem is, I just never used it. Very rarely. Again, much like with Twist of Fate, usually by the time a target would get below 20% health, they were dead. unless you just had a really good healer, or they were a healer. If they were like a pally or something and they could throw a bubble on themselves, maybe they could, or if they had paladins have what is it? The one ability that basically heals them back to full health. If they had that, it's like Holy Word Glory or something like that. I do not play Paladin very often. Probably the class I played the least, so I apologize. I should know the name of that. Word and Glory are coming to mind. I'm just not sure which order they go in. I rarely used it, let alone needing 2 charges of it. So I was looking, and Auspicious Spirits, your apparitions, your shadowy apparitions now deal 100% increased damage and generate 2 insanity. So then I looked, because it's a passive ability. Those are the like ghost that you see jettisoning from us when we do damage. This more than, well, at the time, this did about 500 shadow damage. At max level, it does 1500. So even though these are, when your Shadow Word Pain, damage over time, critical strikes, you also create a shadowy version of yourself that floats forward to the target and deals X shadow damage. So even though it has to be on, you have to get a critical strike of Shadow Word Pain, I'm still getting more of a benefit than with Shadow Word Death. And the extra insanity doesn't hurt, so I have no trouble getting insanity. I used Shadow Crash at the beginning of Legion, and didn't like it. I think this was new then. Maybe that's why I took it. I was trying to think why I took it over something else. I think maybe it was new and I was playing around. Very similar to Chi Burst. I think that monks have hurl a bolt of slow-moving dark shadow energy at the destination, dealing X amount of shadow damage to all targets within 8 yards. So it's a kind of a weird concept for a spell. If it wasn't slow moving, that's what I remember was the problem. Was by the time it actually went out there and did damage, like everything was over with. This is a passive that buffs a passive, which is a bit strange. Your apparitions, though, will, think how a hunter pet will work. A hunter pet, or any pet class, I suppose. I have this issue on my warlock. You will attack something, and then your pet will just kind of run off and start attacking everything. The shadowy apparitions do pretty much the same thing. If they are, again, I'm spamming Vampiric Touch, so there's who knows how many Shadow Word Pain, upwards of 3 to 5, I would say, at an average time. Every time one of those crits, these things are floating off. There doesn't seem to be a radius cap or anything like that. So that was also something I was thinking about in doing this, in switching these out. So Really, anyone's. I think this is probably the only tier that's probably to your preference. And then Mindbender. This is the tier where our artifact was made into a talent. Same name. Void Torrent. Works exactly. Major dagger to the sky. Torrent of energy into the target. Yeah, works exactly the same way. I took Mindbender to replace Shadow Fiend. Mindbender on a 1 minute cooldown is pretty hard to beat. Doesn't give the mana regen that it does as Disc. However, it does help generate insanity, and it is annoying if you have it on you. So again, when Mind Bomb is on cooldown, or you're just in a skirmish or something like that, this would probably be the next thing you'd go to. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, this would count as single target damage, so it works with Vampiric Embrace. At least in theory. I haven't noticed that per se. It works that way as Disc, so I would think it would work that way for Shadow. Lingering Insanity, when Void Form ends, its haste bonus fades by 1% every 2 seconds instead of ending immediately. So I tried this again at the beginning of Legion. And there's a couple abilities like this in game. Mage has a couple abilities like this. And depending on what they do, they're a bit of a toss-up. There's also a couple artifacts traits that do something similar. And it's kind of a 50-50 depending on what they do, whether they're good or not. This, I would say, wasn't. Haste really isn't a problem. I have 6% haste now. And I've had roughly that, give or take roughly about that, a little more than that, probably on average, leveling. And haste just isn't a problem for priests, generally speaking, as it is for other classes. So a lot of people will probably take Void Torrent. That's fine. That's fair. I prefer Mindbender, so I know it's there. I'm going to go for it. So, Legacy of the Void. Void Eruption's cast time is reduced by 40%. It may be cast at any time your insanity level is 60 or higher. So this is definitely nice. And then I thought there was one of these that maybe not. Yes, Void Origins. Void Eruption is now instant cast. These others have, I know this one does. Let me make sure. Immediately activate a new Void Farm and release an explosive blast of pure void energy, causing shadow damage to all enemies in 10 yards. Well, Surrender to Madness has a horrible drawback. You die at the end of it. Well, actually, I take that back. You basically you would die in PvP. Then you take all your insanity generating abilities, generate 100% more insanity, and you can cast while moving for 1 minute. Then you take damage equal to 90% of your maximum health and cannot regenerate or cannot generate insanity for 30 seconds. So, two horrible drawbacks, actually. You take 90% of the damage you deal, which in a good game, an average game, you can deal quite a bit. Definitely exceeding your health. And you cannot generate insanity for 30 seconds. So I'm pretty well keeping Void Eruption on cooldown in PvP. I suppose maybe there's a benefit to this, again, like with raiding. I don't really know. It just, I couldn't get past the drawback to take it to even play with it. And I don't particularly like abilities that it has a cooldown, does a couple other things. I don't, coordination. With me, it's a coordination issue. It's one thing if you have like a heroism, something like that, something like an artifact ability or something, that's fine. Something like this, though, that's doing a couple different things and it has a couple different drawbacks and everything is, to me, this would be counterproductive, I think, for the way I play. The way everything is set up, it's very simple. It's very simple. You don't really have to think about a lot. It's very easy to play, and that's what I like about it. I don't have to stop and think. I don't have to pick it back up. I just kind of have to get a little, get familiar with everything again, and then you're good. One game, one battleground, you're good. Dark Ascension, I could see being good. I don't think it's good enough to take over having 40% less insanity. Because it itself is on a 1 minute cooldown. Yeah, especially as like I said, I feel like I waste Void Bolt more than I use it. I'm guessing at most, if I'm lucky, 4 or 5 times I might get to use it. And that's, again, keeping in mind, if Shadowy Insights procs, you're going to add 12 insanity to keeping Void Bolt up. So you can still generate insanity while this is active. So, yeah. So there you go. And I've already got Mindbender. So I've already got something with a cooldown. So don't generally like having too many things with cooldown. I think at that point you're taking away the simplicity kind of it. So yeah, you kind of have an idea how everything works. Shadowy Insight works well with Misery, which works well with your Shadowy Aspirants. And then everything's generating insanity, which works well with, like I said, the Void. So it's, like I said, this is probably the simplest talents of any class I've seen so far. For my PvP talents, Void Shield, when cast on yourself, 30%. Damage you deal refills your power word shield. Void Origins. Your successful dispels, mass dispels, leap of faith, or power word shield generates 6 insanity. So probably power word shield and occasionally leap of faith. I do try to dispel. I know enough out of habit now that if I see vampiric touch, or I think there's a couple others that do something when they're dispelled. Depending on what my health is, I won't even bother. If you have a shield, it's not really a big deal. So there you go. There is the state of Shadow Priest. Like I said, probably depending on how much you like Disc and the changes they made in Legion with Disc, probably the most fun of the 3 specs, I would say. So hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for watching.